opinions expressed on this program are those of the show hosts, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the staff or management of Wave 105.1 FM, Glimpses Media, or our partners. We strive to provide quality, respectful, and engaging content, and we welcome you to participate in the conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Wave 105.1 FM. Enjoy the show.
Good morning, Guam. It's Monday, March 30th. Right now it's 10:10 a.m. This is our community talk program, Challenge the Status Quo with Mr. Melvin WonPat Borja. It's the last week of Lent, so you guys still have time to check out BK's Big Fish Sandwich and Impossible Whopper. 100% Whopper is 0% beef, now at your favorite Burger King. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll get into the program.
All right, Hafaday, and welcome back to Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin WonPat Borja. I am the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization. The show is brought to you by Guam COD and our friends over at Glimpses, as well as our sponsor, BK. Last week of Lent, like Yuli said, get your Impossible Whopper on, or your fish sandwich.
For sure.
Yeah, all the fast food chains get it together with the fish sandwich.
Right.
You got to have a Lent option if you're going to survive in like 90% Catholic Guam. That's just what it is. But yeah, I hope everybody's having a great Monday morning. The weather is pretty nice, even though it's super hot. I kind of miss the gloomy weather and the rain. I like it. I like it when it's cloudy. I don't know. I think it's my personality. I think I have a cloudy personality.
No, I like it too. When you wear like what is it, a windbreaker? And
Yep, you get to wear you a nice little jacket.
Yeah.
You get to break out the jacket that you never wear.
That's true.
the jacket that you only take with you when you like go visit your family in the States.
That's true.
Or you get lucky and you go to Japan and it's like it's cold. I'm never prepared. I always feel like no matter how geared up I get, I'm never prepared for the cold. When I used to hang out, I used to do work with these youth organizations in the Bay Area, and every now and then we would go out there and train with them or do an event or something like that. And every time I was in the Bay, my friends would always tease me that I looked like I'm going snowboarding.
Oh, so you do the whole thing?
I do the whole thing. Well, I don't do the earmuffs, but I do like the beanie and the jacket. I don't do the
and the gloves.
No, I don't do the scarf and the gloves. That's a little bit too much stuff for me to have to keep track of. I think that's my problem.
Real.
Yeah, like I've tried doing gloves. Gloves last me. Gloves are worse than sunglasses for me. Like I don't like buying fancy sunglasses because I always lose them. Every now and then I do. I always tell myself, I'm going to get this nice pair of sunglasses. And I'm just going to take care of it. And it lasts like a month or something. And then I don't know. I don't know what happened to it. Gloves are even worse. Gloves last me like a week.
Gets wet, and I'm like, no, I don't want to wear gloves anymore.
Or you lose one glove, Like, I always do that. I always lose one glove.
Irritating.
I need me like the little kids, like when we took my girl out to Japan one year and we got her little gloves. And I got her like a little glove leash. Ah. Yeah, they just like clip on your jacket.
Right.
I need that. I need like the little kitty glove leash. The gloves with the string that like tie onto your sleeve so you don't lose. Yeah, I need that.
Right.
I am little kid glove status for sure. Anyhow. I hope everybody's having a great Monday morning. It is about 10:13 a.m. Traffic was actually really nice this morning. I think it's because because the kids are out. I think so too. Yeah, my kid is totally doing the follow your mom or dad to work this week. That's our plan. That is our plan for our kid who's on spring break right now. But some schools I think start their spring break next week. Like, I think it's some of the private schools. For sure, St. Francis. I only know St. Francis because my family's connected to St. Francis. But for sure, St. Francis is not on break this week. They start next week, which is pretty nice. It's funny, like, when I was a kid, spring break meant that we were going to be cleaning everything
Same.
at my
You guys
house.
are get ready to deep clean.
Yeah, we're gonna deep clean, super hard deep clean.
Sure.
My mom, like, you wake up in the morning and my mom already has a list.
Yes.
And like each of us, all me and my sisters, we each had our own list. So there can be no mistakes. We can't like blame each other. Like I have my own jobs, and I always get like the messed up jobs, like scrub the toilet and like
Clean out the garage.
yeah, like scrape the calcium off the tiles. Oh man, yep. Go and wash off the shutters and like
Yeah.
scrape all the gong off the shutters.
Yes.
Oh man, that was always my job. But yeah, like it's funny, like with other, like my wife her family is, they're Catholic and they practice fully. Let's say that. And so it's funny, like talking to my wife, and her spring break experience is way different than mine. Like also cleaning and stuff, but like with the added factor of you have to be quiet.
Oh yeah.
That's that old school. These kids,
That's
they
the
don't
old
they don't
school,
get
yeah.
the quiet enforcement during spring break anymore. At least I don't see it. But I remember that. Like I remember all my friends were like, "No, we can't. Even though we're done with our chores, we cannot play
Kinda
outside
play,
because
yeah.
my mom and dad said we have to be quiet."
No loud music.
Yeah, no
all
loud
those
music.
things,
Yep. I was like, nobody's allowed to play basketball. I'm like, man, what are we gonna do? We can't play basketball. This is like our one place, place to be free in the village.
Yeah.
Oh man, but yeah, I hope all you, all them kids are having a good spring break if you're on spring break. There's been some interesting things happening in the media lately, or around the world, I guess. And most recently, there was an event being held by this group called Right to Democracy. And so if you're unfamiliar with the group, they have been engaged in a bunch of advocacy for greater political rights for territories, including Guam. Their founder is actually from Guam. I went to high school with him. His name is Attorney Neil Weir. Anyhow, Right to Democracy recently did an event on March 27th. It was a free virtual panel, including legal scholars who were discussing the implications of Trump versus Barbara. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about Trump versus Barbara because the case, at its heart, is a citizenship issue. And I think that a lot of people on Guam kind of just take for granted that, we're U.S. citizens and, we have an organic act. That's what made us U.S. citizens. And, even though people in Guam don't have full political rights as compared to our counterparts in the continental United States and Hawaii, a lot of people kind of just look at it like, well, at least we're citizens. Like we may not vote for president, but who cares about voting for president? And, as long as I'm a citizen, then my rights are protected. Which I think for the most part, in your day to day is true. But, there are some nuances about Guam's citizenship because we're a territory, and the nature in which we attain citizenship. Excuse me. And so, I think that these are important differences, right, between our citizenship status and the status of other citizens in the United States. And so, Trump versus Barbara, which is a birthright citizenship case, I think is important for the people of Guam because there are a lot of clear implications on this case and what it could mean for us. So I wanted to talk a little bit about citizenship today and, what it means for people living in the territories, and, how our territorial status is essentially deficient, even in regard to citizenship. Rarely do we make a critique of our status around the citizenship issue because, everybody living in Guam and anybody born in Guam is is a U.S. citizen, and so and we kind of just take that for granted, I think. But as I'm sure many of you have observed in the United States, being a citizen is not enough anymore, right? Like U.S. citizens are getting picked up by ICE and detained by ICE, and so even people who provide valid identification, they're still vetting that identification to ensure that it's authentic, and so you can be held, while that vetting is processed. And so in Guam, I think it's a lot different in the sense that we're not experiencing the impact of ICE agents and their deployment into the streets in the way that people in the United States, the continental United States, are experiencing it. There was even recently a report about how these federal funding cuts have impacted TSA. And so ICE agents have been deployed to various airports around the United States to assist and kind of pick up the slack, right? And then there's a lot of different takes on why this is happening or whether or not it should happen or if it's effective or not. And, there are people on both sides. Some people are really excited. They're like, oh, great, it's great. These guys are supporting and, helping to keep these institutions running or these facilities running. And then there are others who are really critical of it and, feel like it's being done deliberately to put this type of enforcement into these airports where, there's a lot of people who travel through there. And Guam is not experiencing this in this way, even though there are ICE agents. Their jurisdiction would, understandably extend into Guam, and they could be deployed here in the very similar way that they're being used in the United States, but it just hasn't escalated to that point yet, thankfully. And obviously, ICE has been very controversial in the United States. I think the discourse is great, personally. No matter how you feel about the issue, and, whether or not it's appropriate or right or legal or whatever. I think it's great that people are having a discourse on it. I think it's awesome that people are critical and they're having discussions. And I feel like Guam is an interesting sample, right? Or an interesting petri dish, I guess you could say, because we experience a lot of things in a lot of different ways. I just got the notice that the AG's office, some of the Attorney General's offices have been were recently deputized as ICE agents. Which is obviously speaks to the point, right, that their ICE agents theoretically could be deployed into our streets in the same way that they are being used in the United States. And so, we know that they are here. They just haven't been utilized in the same way. Which is obviously could change, right? I think that Guam more so than ever, more so than anywhere else, is susceptible to federal action, and because we're not a state like, say, California, our ability to combat or to resist at a local level, local governmental level, is very different. And so I think it would be interesting. It'd be interesting to see what would transpire if the people of Guam were experiencing the same kind of challenges imposed by ICE and that type of law enforcement. And I don't think we want. Obviously, we don't want to see that. We don't want to find ourselves in that situation, especially knowing how disempowering it is to fight something like this at a territorial level. I mean, we have our own issues trying to, you know, trying to figure out a way forward when we disagree with the federal government. What more on high priority law enforcement? And obviously the Trump administration has been very, very aggressive in their stance on immigration and citizenship and deportations. And so it would be, I think it would be very interesting, how something like that would transpire on Guam. And obviously very problematic. I think a lot of people hurt and suffer in that scenario. And our ability as a government to advocate for the rights of those people, I think, is significantly less than that of a state, or if we were freely associated or independent. You wouldn't be able to. It would be a lot more. I guess I shouldn't say you wouldn't be able to. I guess anything is possible, but it would be a lot more difficult to deploy ICE agents and execute any kind of enforcement in a freely associated jurisdiction or an independent nation's jurisdiction. There have to be an agreement with the host country, which is not the case for Guam, right? Guam as a territory, we're unilaterally controlled by the federal government. And so all it really is a directive. It's a directive from the federal government, from federal law enforcement, to just say, hey, we want these are our priorities for law enforcement, and this is how we're going to do it. And we would be, we would definitely struggle to push back against that at a local level, simply because our local government is not empowered in the same way that state governments are. Which I think is I feel like this is kind of the reoccurring argument that I get into a lot with people, and they say like, oh, well, you complain about this, that, and the other from, American government, but where would Guam be without the American government? And, it could be so much worse if we were, under a different country. And I mean, to be fair, that's a valid argument, but logically, it could also be better. I mean, just to be fair, also could be better. But I think that the more important piece here is that if we're gonna be a part of the United States, then I believe that we should be fully a part of it, right? Completely and equally. And if that's not an option for Guam, if giving Guam the same kind of political participation as other members of the union is not possible, then the responsibility, the righteous thing to do here by the United States is to give Guam an opportunity to get that kind of a treatment elsewhere. You know what I mean? And maybe that has to happen through a compact of free association, or maybe that has to be done through, the claiming of independence and political sovereignty. But, that's consistent with the argument of the Commission on Decolonization, is that Guam has a right to be fully self-governing. And we recognize that you can be fully self-governing through three very particular status options. We can be fully self-governing if we become an independent nation. We can be fully self-governing if we become a freely associated nation, or we could be fully self-governing if we were integrated fully into the United States system of democracy. Which of course would have to include meaningful representation in the U.S. Senate, in the U.S. Congress, and in the Electoral College that is effectively chooses the president of the United States. That would also mean that we have a stake in international affairs, right? Like usually for the State Department represents the United States in all international engagements. And even though the Department of State is run by the federal government, members of Congress, members of the Senate maintain operational and fiduciary oversight of all federal entities. And we saw that, right, like with ICE, with some of the the rising controversy surrounding the activities of ICE agents, particularly the the incident in Minneapolis where an individual, what's his name, Preddy, was killed by ICE agents. That kind of just set it off, and then there were a lot of other incidents, that also rightfully deserved that same kind of attention. But that's kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. And that that in turn triggered a number of congressional hearings regarding oversight of ICE and operations. And I mean, if you watched any, it was really great entertainment. It was way better than the legislative TV. Sometimes I swear I watch legislative TV just because it's like, if you like a good drama, watch the legislative channel. There's a lot of drama on legislative TV. But I got to say, these congressional hearings on ICE were way more exciting. I can't even remember her name. I think it's Kristi Noem.
Yeah, Kristi Noem.
There you go, Kristi Noem. Boy, did she...
all these people are like the characters.
Yeah.
Kash Patel. Like,
yeah.
It's like, what is going on?
I mean, she herself is quite the character, I have to say. She is. She is a very polarizing character. Yeah. I mean, she kind of... she totally fits that Karen mode, you know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I imagine her coming into my retail job when I was in college and asking to speak to the manager.
Yes.
I want to speak to the manager. I always wanted to be the manager when that happened. You know what I mean? Like, when I was a younger dude working, as a subordinate in the private sector, I always wanted to be the manager when that unreasonable customer is like, I want to see the manager. I always wanted to be like, ma'am, you are seeing the manager and you're wrong here. And we have a right to refuse to serve anybody at our establishment. So you got to go. I've always wanted to 86 somebody. Just be like, ma'am, you are being extremely rude. And quite frankly, that was racist what you just said. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. I just always wanted to try it out. But yeah, watching those hearings was really intense. And, granted, to be fair, it's not like the problems that the community is facing with ICE agents and, their particular brand of enforcement. It's not like we've solved these things after these congressional hearings. Yeah, Kristi Noem got fired. And did she resign? I don't know if she resigned. I know she's no longer the head of the agency. Yeah. But nonetheless, it's ICE is still doing what ICE has been doing. It's just got a different head now. So, but where is our agency in an issue like that, right? Like, if, let's just say, for example, that the AG deputized all of these ICE agents and these guys started running up the streets acting a fool. I mean, what is Guam going to do about it? Guam definitely is not going to have the kind of pressure and influence that, the representative from Minneapolis had when one of his constituents was killed, right? And it's just the reality of being, having a non-voting delegate in the House, having a non-voting delegate when other larger jurisdictions have multiple voting delegates. And, that's how it works if you didn't skip that day in case you skipped that day in American government in high school. States with a larger population have an increased higher number of congressional representatives. But every state regardless of population, has two voting representatives in the Senate, in the upper house, which obviously Guam does not have. Guam does not have any, not even non-voting representation. I remember when that was a thing. I think it was Senator, or at the time it was former Congressman Mike St. Nicholas was pressing for, he was trying to get a non-voting delegate in the House of the Senate, which I always just, I'm going to be mean right now, but I always thought that was dumb, personally. I'm just like, man, we don't want another non-voting delegate. And I get it. Okay, I'm not being, at least I think I'm not being unreasonable here. I'm not saying that there's no value in having a non-voting delegate in the Senate. If I was saying that means that there's no value in having a non-voting delegate in the Congress, which I don't believe. I mean, I think it sucks that that's all we get, that it's, we can't have the dignity of having a vote. I think that's absolutely problematic. But, I recognize that there's a lot of great work that can be done even as a non-voting delegate in Congress, because our rep gets to, sit on committees, chair committees, which is powerful for sure. And arguably, they would be able to do similar things at a higher level in the Senate, even as a non-voting delegate. But, I mean, I guess I would be less critical of a plan to bring a non-voting delegate into the Senate if I felt like we were simultaneously making progress on Guam's political status and self-determination decolonization. I would absolutely feel better about it. Anyway, I'm totally going way off on a tangent right now while I have this awesome set of notes in front of me. Thanks, Byron, for prepping for the show today. Anyway, let me backtrack to where I started. We were talking about the Trump versus Barbara case, Supreme Court case, and this was the case is to be argued on April 1st of this year, which is just right around the corner. So on January 20th of 2025, President Trump issued an executive order that prohibited government departments and agencies from issuing or otherwise accepting documents recognizing U.S. citizenship for a person born in the United States to a mother who was unlawfully present or temporarily present and whose father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. So in other words, the executive order is instructing government agencies not to issue a birth certificate to a kid, a baby born in the U.S. if their mother was unlawfully, was in the country illegally, or the father was in the country illegally. And this is, in short, I'm gonna attempt to navigate the Trumpian mind here, but I feel like in short, what the president is trying to do is trying to say, you can't just get citizenship from being born in the country, which is that's been the standard since the beginning, right? Since the inception of the United States and the framework on U.S. citizenship is that citizenship is a birthright. If you're born in the United States, you are a United States citizen. And so, of course, this is all kind of part of the president's bigger stance, wider stance on immigration. And so the executive order, which is listed as 14160, also known as Protecting the Meaning and Value of American Citizenship. And so the order says that the 14th Amendment, which provides for birthright citizenship, excludes certain, quote, persons who are born in the United States but not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The order prohibited federal government departments and agencies from issuing documents recognizing U.S. citizenship or accepting documents issued by state, local, or other governments or authorities purporting to recognize U.S. citizenship to persons in two circumstances. One, when that person's mother was unlawfully present in the United States and the person's father was not a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident at the time of said person's birth. And two, when that person's mother's presence in the United States was lawful but temporary and the person's father was not a United States citizen or lawful resident at the time of said person's birth. And so even if somebody, it also applies to somebody, let's say somebody came to the United States with a legal, through a legal pathway, right? They had a green card or something. If she got pregnant in the United States, if the father was not a citizen or a lawful permanent resident at the time of that kid's birth, then they won't be extended U.S. citizenship. Now, I think what's really interesting about this is that the EO also extends to recognition of existing documents or existing citizenship. So in other words, let's say that your parents met this criteria, right? They were unlawfully in the country, but you were born in the country and you already got U.S. citizenship. This is built to basically retroactively revoke your citizenship, or at the very least, functionally not recognize your citizenship, which I think is wild if you think about that. Like that's always been one of the pillars of U.S. government, is that once you're given U.S. citizenship, it can't be taken from you, unless like you commit an act of treason or something. Which is punishable by death. So, like, who cares about your passport if you got hung or, killed through lethal injection or whatever, You're not supposed to lose your citizenship. That's the deal. I mean, even even people who commit the most heinous crimes and are like, sentenced to death, or life imprisonment. I mean, even those people have constitutional rights that have to be recognized. It's crazy. Like, if you ever look up the, just different cases of, challenging the federal government on the rights and the local government on the rights of prisoners absolutely have rights, right? Even though they may be incarcerated and found guilty of committing, certain crimes, they nonetheless have rights because they're human beings and they're citizens. And I think that this is, it's crazy like that that this EO is being applied in this way where, they're just not going to recognize your citizenship or your documents, because now they're saying if your mom or your dad was not a lawful resident, a permanent resident of the country, then, your citizenship is not valid. It's pretty wild. Which, I want to just, I can't help myself. I can't help but think about this whole fight that we've been having at a local level and, national level on Guam law and the way that it recognizes who is eligible to vote in a self-determination referendum or plebiscite and who is not. And the argument, for at least in simple, the argument that a lot of people have pushed in support of limiting eligibility is that, for one, the right to decolonize is the right of the colonized, but also that, it's unfair to say that we just use regular election eligibility for something, for the execution of a sacred human right, for us to exercise. Sorry, not exercise is a better word. For us to exercise a sacred human right That everybody just gets to weigh in on this, even people who have already self-determined or whose, ancestors have self-determined, have participated freely in a system of government. Even President Trump is like, oh, you got to be a permanent resident. I mean, how many people qualify to be eligible to vote if the only requirement to vote in a Guam election is to have an address and, have lived there for 30 days? And I think it's crazy. I think it's crazy to say that somebody who has lived here for 30 days and, is only going to be here for the length of his or her contract, which is going to be another, 2 years. And then after that, they're moving back to like Wyoming. It's crazy to think a person like that is just going to be like, yeah, I have a right. I have a right to vote and determine Guam's political destiny. It's crazy. It's crazy. And even that principle doesn't jive with President Trump's stance on citizenship. Anyhow, the order directs federal agencies not to issue or accept citizenship documents for such children born more than 30 days after its effective date. So from February 19th, 2025, the Trump administration is clear in this case that the order would apply only prospectively so that the government would not strip citizenship of a person who previously qualified for birthright citizenship. And so, this is really only for this 30 days after effective date. So they won't retroactively go, years back. I know that's totally how I was making it sound. But nonetheless, right, I think that this raises a lot of important questions about our citizenship, which is fundamentally different than what the impacted individuals feel for, or what their situation is as birthright citizens. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the term statutory citizenship, that is the kind of crux of this issue, right? Is that if most of us know the Organic Act of Guam as being the document that made us U.S. citizens, gave us U.S. citizenship, and authorized the creation of a local government for Guam. And prior to the signing of the Organic Act, there are a lot of Chamorros who wanted U.S. citizenship because they felt like it was the way that we were going to get. We were going to have the protection of our rights, have the law on our side. And at that time, the salient issue was military land taking, right? Right after the war, about 2/3 of the island was taken by the U.S. military. And for a lot of residents, it was, they were forcibly removed from their properties. They were just told by soldiers, hey, look, this is going to be a military installation now. You can't live here. You got to go somewhere else. In some cases, the federal government acquired the land or purchased the land. In others, they just outright took it. And so a lot of people thought that becoming U.S. citizens meant that that the federal government would have to respect the rights of private property owners. Unfortunately, what ended up happening was that when the people of Guam became U.S. citizens, it meant then that the federal government was entitled to exercise eminent domain. The federal government cannot use eminent domain on non-citizens. It only applies to citizens. So eminent domain is when you need to acquire, the government needs to take something that belongs to you to serve the greater good. 90% of the time, 99% of the time, it's land, right? They need to take your land for the greater good of the country. And so in our case, the military installations were for the greater good of the United States as a whole. But that could only be applied if they first made the people of Guam citizens so that the land taking could be legal. And so a lot of, that was the critique by a lot of Tomoto activists at that time, was that, this was just a trick so that they could legalize the land takings. But the reason why I bring this up is because in 1950, when we became citizens, the Organic Act was not an act of self-determination, right? The Tomoto people didn't write the Organic Act. We didn't negotiate on the Organic Act. We didn't sign or execute or authorize the Organic Act. The Organic Act was written by Congress, signed by Congress, and then by the president, and enacted by Congress and the president. And so, right off the bat, that this is not, it's not self-determination. We didn't choose a political status. We didn't even choose citizenship. It was just imposed on us, given to us, whether you wanted it or not. And it's not to say that nobody wanted citizenship, just to be clear, so that I don't get any of the crazies calling me and yelling at me on the on the airwaves. I'm not saying that there was nobody who wanted citizenship. Obviously, there are people who did. But but you can't argue the reality that we didn't choose it. We didn't sign it. We didn't write it. We didn't negotiate it. And so it cannot, by definition, be an act of self-determination. But the piece that's really relevant to Trump versus Barbara and this citizenship case is that when we became U.S. citizens via the Organic Act, it meant that we became citizens by a statute, right? By a policy act. So it was a piece of paper that made us U.S. citizens. And that's why we distinguish a statutory citizen from a birthright citizen. So nobody in Guam at the time, who in 1950, nobody in Guam was a birthright citizen. In 1951, these were all, everybody was a statutory citizen. And this is important, right? Because if there's a challenge at the highest levels in the federal government, this is being heard now by the Supreme Court. And of course, we don't know yet, right? We don't know how the Supreme Court is going to rule, what they're going to say, and what it's going to mean for the executive order. But until they make that decision, this is what it is. This is what the federal government is doing. These agencies are going to follow the executive order from President Trump. They're not going to recognize documents. They're not going to issue new documents if the parents meet these criteria. And all of this to say that this, all of this is happening in regard to, what normally would be considered birthright citizenship for all of these little babies that have been born since February 19 of 2025. And so, I think it's important for those of us living in Guam who understand the nature of U.S. citizenship here in Guam. I think at first we have to acknowledge that we are statutory citizens, not birthright citizens, and there's a difference between the two, and that difference matters, especially now. I think now more so than ever, especially seeing what has been happening in the United States. I think it's important for us and intelligent of us to be critical about it and to recognize that there is a difference between being a birthright citizen and being a statutory citizen. And I'm totally going to digress again, but that's our definition. That's our definition of native inhabitant in Guam for the Tomoto self-determination referendum or plebiscite. The definition is that you have to be somebody who was made a citizen by virtue of the Organic Act in 1950 or a descendant of said person. And, our legislature used that deliberately at that time because it was a clear way for us to say, here's a group of people, not an ethnic group of people, a political group of people, time-based group of people who were clearly denied their right to self-determination. And it's as simple as that. If you were fully self-governing, you came from a place that was fully self-governing and you moved to Guam, you didn't have your right to self-government taken from you. Yeah, you live in a place now that it's non-self-governing, but you chose that. You chose to come here and to be a lesser U.S. citizen, a second-class U.S. citizen. It is what it is, guys. I don't mean any disrespect to any individual. I mean a lot of disrespect to the colonizer who imposes this on us. But that's the reality. If you live in Guam and are a U.S. citizen, you're a second-class citizen because you don't have meaningful representation and participation in a U.S. system of democracy in the way that your counterparts in, say, California or Texas or Florida do, right? And so when you used to live in Texas, you were fully self-governing, right? You voted for your congressional delegates who voting on the floor. You voted for your 2 senators, and you voted in a presidential election that decided the presidency. So you were self-governing. And you moved to Guam, and now you're not. But nobody forced you to move to Guam. You know what I mean? The U.S. government didn't say, oh, you got to leave and you got to go live in Guam and you got to have these rights, lesser rights than, where you started from. Whereas, people who live in Guam are from Guam, are descendants of people who became citizens in 1950. They didn't choose this. This is just what it is. They were born into this unfortunate situation. And guys, I just got to say, it's not our fault. Why are you blaming us? Why are you so mad at us? You think we like being colonized? We didn't choose this. And quite frankly, if the United States the United States government had owned up to their responsibility way back in 1946, they signed the UN Charter in 1946, 4 years before they signed the Organic Act, knowing full well that their responsibility is to support the rights of the indigenous people to advance their political status. They already signed a previous document during the Treaty of Paris that said the same thing, that the U.S. Congress has a responsibility to support the advancement of the civil and political rights of the native inhabitants. It says the words native inhabitants. Oh, man. Me too, guys. Me too. I'm tired of talking about this. I'm tired. I'm tired of fighting for it. I'm tired of having to defend our rights at every single turn. But that's the reality of our situation. So, anyhow, going back to Trump versus Barbara. Within hours of the issuance of the executive order back in February of last year, a group of pseudonymous persons who fell within the order's categories, along with their parents, initiated a class action lawsuit against the president and certain other federal officers, arguing that the order violated the 14th Amendment and the Immigration and Nationality Act, among other claims. And so a federal judge in New Hampshire issued a preliminary ruling in favor of the plaintiffs and enjoined enforcement of the order with respect to the petitioners and with respect to any individual entity in any other matter of instance within the jurisdiction of this court, end quote. And this is while the case moved forward. So before the New Hampshire court issued its ruling, 3 other district courts issued nationwide or universal preliminary injunctions against enforcement of the order. And so there are at least 4 separate courts that said, yeah, this is no bueno. But in December of last year, December 5th, 2025, the Supreme Court granted the president's petition for certiorari or judicial review of a decision of a lower court before judgment, bypassing the circuit court and accepting the case for review. So they hadn't even decided this in the lower courts. But Trump is already like, nah, I don't like where this is going. We're going to just take this straight to the Supreme Court. Anyhow, we are running right up on the top of the hour. Got 2 seconds. So I'm going to wrap this up real quick, and we're going to take a real quick commercial break. But keep it locked here. We're going to come back. If your interest has been piqued and you want to talk, we're going to be taking calls in the next hour. So keep it here. We're going to be continuing the conversation on Trump versus Barbara and the citizenship issue and what it has to do with Guam, how it affects us. You're listening to Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin, and we are here till noon. Keep it locked on Wave 105.1 FM.
This is CBS News on the Hour, your home for original reporting.
I'm Heather Bosch. In the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, Iran continues its strikes against U.S. allies. The latest from CBS's Holly Williams.
Iran targeted Kuwait's main airport again this weekend with multiple drones. The Kuwaiti authorities said there were no casualties, but the cost of this war is mounting for America and its allies in the Middle East.
Foreign ministers from regional countries met in Islamabad today. Afterwards, Pakistan's foreign minister said talks between the U.S. and Iran will be held there. Ishaq Dar was not specific. NASA is poised to launch its first manned lunar mission in half a century. More from CBS's Peter King.
Forecasters say the weather is 80% favorable for NASA's Artemis 2 mission to launch Wednesday on its first attempt. 4 astronauts are set to fly around the moon if all goes as planned. It's the first human test flight for the Orion spacecraft. Pilot Victor Glover looks forward to it.
We're going to not only fly the vehicle manually, we're going to, execute the 6 degrees of freedom, so translating forward, backwards, left, right, up, and down.
It'll be the first time humans have been out of low Earth orbit since Apollo 17 landed on the moon back in 1972. Peter King, CBS News, Orlando.
TSA agents could be paid as soon as tomorrow. They've been going without during the partial government shutdown. Justine Stewart sympathizes.
They're trying to get to work, then not have money to put gas in their car and then to feed their families and take care of regular business to make sure that they're secure at home. That has to be very scary.
Congress has yet to fully fund the government, but President Trump has directed TSA agents to be paid. A Texas teacher has a modern twist on book reports. Here's CBS's Michael Wallace.
Twice a week, the students in Christy Cooper's second grade class at Heritage Elementary School in Grapevine step up to a microphone and give a review of the latest books they've read.
My book is Who Would Win? Lobsters versus Crab. Is exciting and it's about sea life.
Ooh. So Ethan gives this book 5 stars.
Cooper posts QR codes to the podcasts around the school so others can hear them.
Producing something that we can be proud of at the end.
Very cool, very fun, and you can show your parents.
Michael Wallace, CBS News.
California is the first state to require food manufacturers to add folic acid to certain foods. The vitamin can prevent severe birth defects. Florida, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Oregon are considering similar requirements. This is CBS News.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Half a world away.
Reach for the stars.
If I take time to think, they might go get Brad.
On CBS, Sunday morning.
Jen, I didn't know you shopped here.
Hey, I'm hunting for something fresh for spring.
Oh, girl, skip them all. Jewelry Television has the best spring looks right now.
JTV, way ahead of you. Just hit up JTV.com yesterday, scored the cutest clover earrings, 2 tennis bracelets, and this gorgeous pearl ring.
Right now, new customers get $20 off any purchase of $99 or more at JTV.com.
Oh, and gold hoops and this turquoise bracelet.
Just a couple things, huh?
Maybe more than a couple.
Ready to celebrate? Hop into Easter festivities with everything you need at Target. First, get ready for your special occasion with 25% off stylish looks. With spring vibes, vibrant colors, and fresh florals, you'll find outfits that match everyone's style. Then, fill up their baskets with endless joy. From select Easter plushies to fun toys they'll love at 20% off. Don't miss out. Make this Easter unforgettable at Target.
High school singing groups are giving new voice to Beyoncé's music.
2 years after Beyoncé's Cowboy Carter album dropped, her song is becoming an anthem for school choirs. The director of the Germantown Friends a cappella group in Philadelphia says a student, Ryn Patterson Jordan, recommended it and wound up getting the solo. She said she feels like a vessel delivering Beyoncé's message about reclaiming country music and what it means to be a black woman in America. Deborah Rodriguez, CBS News.
At the box office, Project Hail Mary is now projected to earn $54.5 million this weekend, the #1 spot in its second weekend. I'm Heather Bosch. This is CBS News.
Your island, your conversations, your station, Wave 105.1 FM, Glimpses Media.
Ifinanogwin Samoro. Hinasu ginini komisyon ifinut Samoro. Ekuog si Palik Felix Leon Guerrero. Inintibista a Señora Teresita Flores.
Haji for na gwi how for minute Samoro.
Ene dikiket na padgun ne. Ja seso komento sinanang tatao ifinut Samoro. Kantoy loki pamale tagi tiahu se tiuhu no angin mandana. Lo sinanang tatao seso man finut Samoro za ene dikikyo ne. Sesu ufaisen hafan na palabras. Utagi palabras ako komikiling ako hafa komikiling mangil unsongan kareta. Pasino angin olok no guma. Tagi palabras ani. O comprendi todo i linguagem que finot Samoro sa sesu o quentusi sinanang tatao que finot Samoro za quando vai na te dinanzi lo malina sa makoridio mona ne telekono o go agradeci
Tia Trasasao Senior Hat.
Half a day, Guam. The Guam Hotel and Restaurant Association invites you to the Fair Trade Show, Guam's premier hospitality and food service event. Join us April 16 and 17 at the Hyatt Regency Guam from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Experience hands-on training sessions and exciting culinary competitions featuring professionals, apprentices, and pastry talent. Discover new products, connect with suppliers, and celebrate Guam's hospitality industry. Don't miss Fair 2026. Visit ghra.org for details.
Senior Hat. Ginin amano na umetsa kaut Samoro. Hinasug ginin ni komisyon ifinut Samoro. Ekulog si Devin Santos. Inintibista as Melvin WonPat Borja.
Can you tell me about how you first learned to speak Tamoru? Who taught you and at what age?
Geez, so from a very young age, maybe like 4 or 5, my grandma and my grandpa were very, very, very influential in learning Chamorro, bringing Chamorro into our household, and just making sure that me and my siblings were immersed in the Chamorro language.
Senior Hat.
KGUM-FM, Dedito, the talk of Guam. This is Wave 105.1 FM, a Glimpses Media radio station.
Which cars and trucks go above and beyond when it comes to safety? This is Jeff Gilbert with the Car Chronicles. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety honoring 45 vehicles with its Top Safety Pick Plus designation and 18 others with the lesser Top Safety Pick.
There are a variety of vehicles on this list that should meet your needs. There are sedans, SUVs, and some pickups. There are a range of vehicle sizes. If you're interested in gas, traditional gas engines or electric motors.
Institute President David Harkey says the full list is at iihs.org, and you don't need to spend a fortune to get a safe vehicle.
There are actually more than a dozen vehicles that start on our Top Safety Pick Plus list that start at under $30,000.
One notable category of vehicles missing from the list, minivans, due to issues with safety in the rear seat. With the Car Chronicles, I'm Jeff Gilbert, CBS News.
At Johns Hopkins, I'm Elizabeth Tracy. American Cancer Society data find that the majority of people who are diagnosed with cancers of all types will still be alive 5 years later. Johns Hopkins Kimmel Cancer Center Director William Nelson says this is good news indeed.
The American Cancer Society each year produces a piece on the cancer statistics, and basically they use all the data that they can find to model what's going to happen in the coming year. It's pretty much the best of the overall scorecards for how we're doing with cancer. How many people get it? How many people die from it? Are we doing any better or any worse? It's overall impressive. Big news that's exciting is the 5-year survival rate for all cancers. It's now 70%. That's double of what it was in the 1970s. It's had incredible gains.
Nelson notes there are a few cancers that are increasing in incidence and are being scrutinized closely to find out why, including colorectal cancer and pancreas cancer. At Johns Hopkins, I'm Elizabeth Tracy. At Johns Hopkins, I'm Elizabeth Tracy. People who were older and had advanced cancers benefited from a telephone-based intervention designed to regularly assess their symptoms and refer them to expert clinicians by reducing their visits to emergency departments and need for hospitalization. Kimmel Cancer Center Director William Nelson at Johns Hopkins says the people who did the calling were not health professionals, but the strategy clearly helped these patients.
These would be ones we would expect treatment would be used to improve quality of life, so symptoms would be a very important aspect of that treatment. What was the impact of this on people going to an emergency room or getting admitted to a hospital? They did have fewer emergency department visits, 48% without this resource versus 31% with the resource. Reduced hospitalizations from about 40% to about 19%, reduced the total average cost by about $12,000. So this was an effective intervention.
At Johns Hopkins, I'm Elizabeth Tracy.
The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the show hosts, guests, and callers, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the staff or management of Wave 105.1 FM, Glimpses Media, or our partners. We strive to provide quality, respectful, and engaging content, and we welcome you to participate in the conversation. Thank you for tuning in to Wave 105.1 FM. Enjoy the show.
All right, Guam. It's 11:12 a.m. on this Monday, March 30th. We have one more hour with our community talk program, Challenge the Status Quo, with Mr. Melvin WonPat Borja. It's the last week of Lent, so you guys have a chance to still get the BK's Big Fish Sandwich and Impossible Whopper, 100% Whopper, 0% beef, now at your favorite Burger King. Thank you for tuning in to Wave 105.1 FM, the Talk of Guam, and we'll get into the program.
All right, and we're back. Welcome back to Challenge the Status Quo. My name is Melvin WonPat Borja. I'm the Executive Director of the Commission on Decolonization. And if you're just joining us, we've been talking about Trump versus Barbara. If you've never heard of it, Trump versus Barbara is a Supreme Court case that will be argued on April 1st, just a few days from now. And it ultimately questions the application of possible revoking of U.S. citizenship. And so the issue at hand is, will the president's order refuses to issue or prohibits the issuing of new citizenship documents and also the recognition of citizenship documents to children who are born from parents who were illegally in the United States. And I'm putting it super cut and dry and simple. It's it's definitely a little more complex than that, but that's the gist of it. And so we're talking about what does this mean for citizens in Guam? Because citizens in Guam we have a very different history in regard to how we attained citizenship. So we left off the last hour just talking about where, what was happening at the lower courts. There were, I believe, 4 other courts that had been, had cases in associated with this EO, issues associated with the EO. And so President Trump, he appealed to the Supreme Court, or he petitioned the Supreme Court for certiorari, which is judicial review of a decision of a lower court. He did this before judgment. And so the Supreme Court granted it, right? On December 25th, the Supreme Court granted his petition for certiorari, or a judicial review of a lower court's decision, even though the courts hadn't yet made their decision. And so essentially he's just kind of bypassing the lower courts and just taking this straight to the Supreme Court. And we'll see what the outcome of the case is, but there are some very obvious and even some, I think, less obvious and pervasive impacts or implications of this court decision, and whether it goes one way or another. And so just a little bit more history on this. At stake here, or in question, is the 14th Amendment on and the Citizenship Clause, right? And that in the 14th Amendment, the Citizenship Clause provides that, quote, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and not subject to the jurisdiction thereof, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, are citizens of the United States. Now, the Supreme Court in the past has only once directly, they've only applied the Citizenship Clause directly, and that was in the 1898 United States versus Wong Kim Ark. And so the Supreme Court in that case upheld that a person born in the U.S. to parents who were citizens of China, but who resided permanently in the U.S., was a citizen of the United States. So the Supreme Court noted that the person's parents were permanent residents of the United States, but did not specifically hold that the Citizenship Clause requires parents to have permanent residence. And so in this case, there were 2 parents who were citizens of China, had Chinese citizenship, but they had a baby, and that the baby should be given birthright citizenship, because even though they were not U.S. citizens themselves, they were permanent residents. But the court also specifically held that the Citizenship Clause, they did not say that the Citizenship Clause requires permanent residence. In 1940, Congress enacted a statute that mirrored the language of the Citizenship Clause, and then they reenacted the same statute in 1952 through the Immigration and Nationality Act. The act specified that, quote, a person born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof shall be a national and citizen of the United States at birth. And so since 1952, the act applies to all persons born in Guam. and so, we we here in Guam have this funky kind of classification, right? That we were initially made U.S. citizens, and we are, most of us, or at least if you're indigenous or you're a native inhabitant by definition, then you are a descendant of a statutory citizen. And that, but birthright citizenship was applied, well, not necessarily birthright, but people born post 1952 in Guam were able to attain citizenship at birth. But Trump versus Barbara tests one of the president's signature policy efforts to eliminate or at least sharply restrict birthright citizenship. The administration says that the order means that the United States will no longer, quote, reward those who violate immigration law with U.S. citizenship for their children and derivative immigration themselves, end quote. Now, if this order is upheld in the Supreme Court, it could mean that nearly 250,000 kids a year who normally would qualify for birthright citizenship, they would no longer qualify. And this would inevitably create a substantial new class of unauthorized non-citizens who are then subject to removal, and there will be, I think, some obvious impacts for them, their families, and who knows what it looks like, just kind of given the immigration enforcement climate today. So there was a virtual panel that was held. I mentioned this earlier. There's a virtual panel held by a group called Right to Democracy, and it was co-sponsored by the Guam Bar Association and the Virgin Islands Bar Association. And they had a panel of legal experts who were discussing this case and the implications for Guam and people living in the territories. The co-director of Right to Democracy, attorney Neil Weir, said that the Supreme Court's handling of this case could shape how it eventually approaches the long unresolved question of whether the 14th Amendment citizenship guarantee applies to U.S. territories at all. And by the way, there was a fantastic article written by my good friend Walter Ujoa from the Guam Daily Post, and this was on March 26, 2026. Shout out to Walt. Walt's a great reporter, very thorough, does his homework. I appreciate you, Walt. Thanks for always giving us a fair shake. So in his article, he quotes Attorney Weir as saying, quote, how the Supreme Court approaches the question with respect to the Trump executive order would influence how it considers the separate and distinct question of birthright citizenship in the territories, end quote. Attorney Weir says that this is a question that the court has sidestepped for more than a century. So after the Spanish-American War, the William McKinley presidential administration moved to redefine citizenship in newly acquired territories, and the Supreme Court stayed silent on this issue at that time. Attorney Weir says, quote, the Supreme Court has avoided the question of citizenship in U.S. territories for 125 years, and that's had some real serious consequences in terms of creating uncertainty about citizenship status of people born in Guam and other territories, end quote. Attorney Weir describes Guam, the federal government's position in the court as, he says, quote, to people, sorry, I'm getting mixed up here. My bad, guys. So he says that the uncertainty is not just about legal theory. The federal government's state position in court proceedings is that Guam residents hold only a statutory right to citizenship, and one that Congress could revoke. Even more troubling, Weir said, is whether such a move could be made retroactively, stripping citizenship from people who have held it since birth. Now, of course, this is all just theory, right? In theory, if logically, if this, then that. And so I think, what the reason why I bring this up in the forum from Right to Democracy and these comments from Attorney Weir is that these are things that I think all of us in Guam and the territories, we have to pay attention to, because, already the challenge of a person's citizenship at a federal level, there, the framework on which we have defined, the United States has defined citizenship and the right to it, and the protections from the Constitution around that right. This is one of the fundamental ones, right? This is one of the ones that you shouldn't need the court to interpret the Constitution, and specifically in the right around the right to citizenship, or what the rights of a citizen are, and the rights of a citizen to protect their citizenship status. But if the court is going to weigh in on this, especially in this instance, then what does it mean moving forward? And if there can be such a stout challenge on kind of regular run-of-the-mill birthright citizenship, right, which is very different than it is for us, even though the attaining citizenship at birth has been applied to Guam since 1952. It's undeniable that we are nonetheless statutory citizens, right? And so, at least in theory, it's possible. And we won't really know what that framework looks like, or what that pathway looks like, until after this Supreme Court case is decided. Which I definitely think is concerning for a lot of people, and it should be. But I also think that this is the reason why Guam's political status and our decolonization is so important, is because, there are so many uncertainties when you're a territory. As a territory, we try to mirror our counterparts in the continental U.S., the members of the Union, right? And the way that we enact and create our governmental framework, right? And for the most part, it's supposed to mirror state governments. We even at times behave like state governments, like we have some kind of sovereignty within our jurisdiction. But we've seen time and time again that that's not necessarily the case, and we see it a lot in when the federal government's priorities don't align with our local priorities, and we've been seeing that particularly more with the current and recent militarization of the island, or increased militarization of the island. The what that means for our local community, among these military activities, while the country is actively engaged in a conflict, in a war. And so but that also extends, I think, clearly into our natural resources. The deep sea mining issue is in principle very much so like this, in that it's being mobilized or activated through an executive order, right? And I think that in even though these are two very different issues, I think fundamentally they're very similar, right? We're talking about a fundamental basic right that should be immune to a challenge, or immune to the whim of a presidential EO. But it's not, and we're clearly kind of seeing that it's not. And so I believe that that's the whole point of this, right? The whole point of this conversation is to I think that the questions that are being asked, and I'm interested in I was interested in this discussion particularly because I wanted to know, what did these legal experts think are the implications? What does it look like? What does it potentially look like with, a favorable Trump decision or a decision in the court that favors the Trump stance? What does that mean for us? But I think regardless, like no matter what, right? Even if Trump is defeated in the Supreme Court on this citizenship issue, I don't think that gives us the kind of protection that we need. I really believe that the only, specifically in regard to U.S. citizenship, I think the only real protection comes from elevating into, a fully integrated status, into, Guam becoming a state. If we're just talking about citizenship and how do you protect, the residents of Guam and their right to U.S. citizenship, then I think that's the only way. I don't think that so long as we remain a territory, it'll always be at risk. And so I think that, but again, that's going to have to factor into people's decisions and desires for a permanent political status. Maybe people look at that and think, well, yeah, citizenship is important to me, but maybe they don't like the framework of, Guam government being a state or a state government, fully integrated member of the union. And so if that's not it, then it logically would have to be either free association or independence. And of course, citizenship can be negotiated, right? I mean, at least in terms of how how you attain citizenship, or what would your resident citizenship status be. It's not unprecedented that that people can be given dual citizenship. I don't think it's desirable necessarily by the federal government. Personally, I don't think that they like that. But whatever the case, right? I mean, I think that the bottom line for us is that it has to be, there has to be a framework, and there has to be some guarantees and protections. That's just what it is, And so, I mean, I think that the only reason why we're logically immune or not immune to this conversation on citizenship is because we're a territory. And so I think it's really kind of cut and dry in that way, right? Like, if that's what you value, then the only viable option is full integration or statehood. But the same can be said in terms of protections, right? Our rights to citizenship protection can be found through a sovereign status like free association or independence. I just think more logically we would establish our own citizenship and our own citizenship requirements under that framework. But it's possible. I mean, it's been done prior. The record is pretty clear on it. I think that we've had a great opportunity to learn from a lot of those experiences, and we would be very informed moving into a discussion about what would be a citizenship framework that works for Guam. I got some people on the Instagram Live that I want to acknowledge. But before I get to it, I think before we went on break, there was a few calls that came into the studio, and something is going down with our phone line. Yuli was telling me that he had a couple calls and he answered all of them, but it just kept dropping the call for some reason. We don't know. Yeah. It is unexplained. It's not Yuli's fault. Yes. He felt super bad about it. So if that was you calling, we apologize. The number is 671-922-1051 or 922-1052. Right. And if you can't get through that way, you can WhatsApp text the 1051 number.
Yes,
yeah,
that's correct.
All right, so 922-1051 is the one that's on the WhatsApp. So if you add it to your contacts, you can text your question or comment, and Yuli will get it to me. We're also streaming live on Wave's YouTube channel and on Guam COD's Instagram Live. So we got some peeps on the Instagram Live. I want to just acknowledge some of these comments. Nick Flores says, some of us don't equate decolonization as voting for a colonial president or having a colonial citizenship. Some of us don't even equate that to democracy. Right. So, I mean, I think that's predictable, right? That there are people who don't subscribe to this, right? Or at least in this framework. But that's why, that's why I feel like, the referendum, the plebiscite on, our ability to kind of weigh all the ins and outs of each particular status, I think is really important because, people need to be educated about what it means to be independent or what it means to be freely associated or what it means to be a state. And I think that there are a lot of misconceptions about each of those things. Some of them are pretty wild. But, they're all, what's great about all three statuses is that they all meet the criteria of having a full measure of self-government, right? We have full, meaningful participation in the system, no matter which one it is. But each one is very different, and each one empowers us in different ways and presents a different set of risks and challenges. So, shout out to the task forces who really dial in on this work. But if you're interested in the basic framework and you want to have a better idea of how these things work in our kind of local organized government, what our systems of government look like and how they're impacted, we have a full self-determination study on our website. You can visit decol.guam.gov, decol.guam.gov. Excuse me. And you can download the study and get all the information on, different aspects of our government and how they are affected. Excuse me. I am struggling right now. But we do have a caller on the air I want to get to. We got a caller on line 1. Hafide, this is Kaduku. That's what it says on the screen. Hafide Kaduku, you're on the air.
I had a dream. Keep that dream going, bro, because we need to dream. And diplomatic immunity. They can give me that if they want. Low unincorporated trust territory of the United States, Kadwa. And they've been planning that 20 years in advance like they plan now. So we keep going around in circles, pothole, before, crater hole, talk the issue, and they got us in check. We need to get out of that check and checkmate them. So God did respect to tell you, sir. We fought for that flag every single time. We were the uniform of honor and pride. We were the most loyal, fighting machine the world's ever seen. And this is what they do to us out here? Stop holding us hostage, man, and give us that right to self-determination. And saying that freedom is not free. Truly thought it done for free, because it's not from freedom. It is 60-40, I'm do 60, I'm 40, and we can all live in peace because we throw in everything, man, even the kitchen sink and the toilet paper and everything. And come on, we're not dumb and stupid. We're not stupid and dumb, because if we were, I'm going to go have that tattooed on my forehead, man. We're human beings out here, and we just want to be treated like one and to live and die in peace in our own homeland, Melvin. And you keep that going, bro, because don't ever let anybody tell you anything, because I'm more American than America itself, bro. I love Woodstock. I love American muscles, bro. 454, 427, 396 Street, 27. I love panhead, knucklehead, shovelhead. And I like parachuting, too. I'm just saying, bro, anti this, anti that. Lana, what more do we have? We don't have to prove nothing to nobody. We do wear that uniform, honor, and pride, and we do fight for peace. The cinema man, peace, room. Up and on across you, man. So keep on going, bro. Don't let nobody tell you anything, because I had a dream, and one day set us free, and that way we can all live in peace, and maybe this whole world can live in peace. So, Melvin, keep doing what you're doing, bro, and thank you, Yuli, and you guys have a nice day.
Sejus Masi Kaduku. Senagradesiao. Man, Yuli, he was buzzing.
He was, yeah. He was very passionate.
That was awesome.
Yeah, he's very passionate.
Man, I need to get a recording of that. I need to get a recording.
YouTube.
I'm gonna have to
Go
drop
back to
it.
the
I'm gonna have to go to the Wave YouTube channel. I need to pull that file.
Timestamp this right now.
I'm gonna call my homie Jed. Be like, bro, I need you to sample this. You need to sample this. We're gonna make a new song.
All right.
Featuring Kaduku. He was bussing. Yeah. I love it. He even had like the Martin Luther King Jr. cadence going on with like the pocket repetition, everything coming in threes. I love it. That's a classic. Right. That's a classic technique. Obama like slayed it with that one. He did. Like his whole campaign, his whole presidency. He ran that cadence. You ever notice that the governor runs that one too? The governor likes her a three. She does. She does the triple list.
Yes.
Super effective. It's like classic poetics. I love it. Zeus Masi Kaduku for the call. If anybody out there is interested in getting down, the number is 922-1051 or 922-1052. I apologize if you've been calling and we've been having issues on the phone lines, but just keep calling. We'll get you on somehow, some way. I don't know what happened in the first hour, but maybe that was Kaduku who was calling in the first hour.
In a good area.
Yeah, third time's a charm. He got it. He got through. We're making it, guys. But anyhow, back to this issue on citizenship. Regardless, right? I'm definitely one of those people that's like, I'm skeptical. I'm totally a pessimist. Like I looked at the Jones Act waiver recently, and I was just over here like scoffing at it. Oh my God, 60 days. What are we going to do? A 60-day waiver that does nothing for the gas prices. But to be fair, I think that all of these things are, yes, while I agree that none of these things solve the problem, they're really just kind of Band-Aid solutions to, a bigger glaring illness. But, we've been at this political status thing for generations. You could argue that Chamorros have fought for self-government since the Spanish time. And there's history on that. You can see that history all over in Guam. There's so many people who are connected to this, who are involved in this, who are still around today, have, fought for this their entire lives. And so I recognize that, yes, that's the ultimate end state, right? Is to be fully self-governing, to decolonize our entire system, and to truly be, in the steering seat on the Sakman, right? But I think also that we can't not do these smaller things. I think we have to be mindful that there are places that we can, little pockets that we can find victories that are meaningful to a lot of our people, like this, the CLTC, I think, is one of those kind of small wins, right? And it doesn't solve the problem. And there are still a lot more issues that we need to overcome. But, the CLTC almost went bye-bye when it was challenged in federal court. And ironically, the CLTC case won, and the other, the case on the Davis case, we lost. And in principle, they're the same, right? The court agreed to a settlement on a definition that was really a time-based definition, just like the native inhabitant definition for the referendum, right? And so, that I think that was, that was a great victory that program didn't just have to ride off into the sunset. But, there are a lot of things I think that we have to fight along the way. And we have to, we have to keep keeping on. And it's tough. I think that it's frustrating that the only wins you get are these little ones. And we just kind of keep going and going and going when it comes to, resolving political status and decolonization. I remember once I got into this is when I first started working at the Commission on Decolonization. I won't name any names, but I had somebody approach me and say, yeah, they were trying to work a deal with the military. And what it was that this person, and to be fair, this person who approached me, I believe, is a really good, good person at heart, right? Had good intentions and sincerely thought that this is a way that, that he could help. And so what he was on was he felt like he was close to making a deal to get the feds to pay for infrastructure in CLTC properties. And if you know the history on this, CLTC has been tough because it's hard to execute the mission, right? To build out all of these farmlands and even plots for residential, units to build a house on it because there's no infrastructure. A lot of these places are locked out of the infrastructure. They don't have, the water lines going in or power lines going in or even, access through, easements. And so this individual approached me because, he felt like he was going to be able to make a deal. But the activists were really hitting a nerve with some of these feds, right? And they're making life, like, we was doing what we do, man. It's doing what we do. And so this person approached me and was like, hey, man, all these activists, right? They're your friends. I was like, yeah, but I would caution you on what you're going to say next. He was like, you think maybe we could you could talk to them. Maybe we could get them to just kind of ease off a bit and let me make this deal. Like I'm trying to, we could win this. Like this could be a huge thing, right? Like that is important to the activists too, right? So maybe you could help me communicate with them that, maybe we can back off or not back off, but kind of ease up on certain things, right? So that we could go in and make nice and we could win on infrastructure. And I just kind of laughed and I was like, man, I'm sorry. Look, I respect what you're trying to do here. And I don't, I didn't want to turn around and be like, you're a sellout. I wanted to be objective, right? And just be like, look, I see that you're trying to you genuinely want to help and you genuinely think that this is, this is helpful. This is a good thing. And to be fair, I don't, I'm not scoffing at CLTC infrastructure. I think that's super important too. But then I turned right around and I told him, I said, look, man, what you got to know about the activists is that we're a different breed, man. We don't have a toolbox of stuff that will they're not like Pokemon cards. You know what I mean? We're not going to trade them here, I'll trade you cultural resources for CLT infrastructure. You know what I mean? I will stop railing you on, contaminating the water if you build me a gym. If you put money into the museum. And so, I think that's the thing, right? I try to respectfully explain this. Look, activists won't compartmentalize an issue just to win on a negotiation and bring home a big piece. You know what I mean? They just won't. And I said, I was like, I think the one exception, which even is I'm doubtful of, the one exception maybe would be sovereignty and decolonization. Like the one thing that they would back off, like, and just kind of, leave everything else alone. Like, we won't tear you apart and protest and do all this stuff if we have like a real path, a real shot at decolonizing. And I just kind of laughed because I was like, even if they did that, they would only do that because they know that being in power with sovereignty means that they can fix everything else. You know what I mean? And once they're sovereign, then they're going to turn right around and be like, feel the burn in my sovereign homeland. And I think that that's just it's we're human beings. It's complicated. I think everybody has their own way, right? Their own way of seeing, like, building a strategy and figuring out what they think is going to be effective or what they think won't. And I think everybody else, everybody has a different way of understanding what they feel like is important to contribute. And, it's difficult because I think we don't always see eye to eye on these things. I mean, shoot, I don't get along with a lot of people that I work with. I don't. And I don't I don't even get along with a lot of activists, to be honest. A lot of these people are my peeps and I love them to death. But some of them, we just don't work well together. Shoot, you know who you are. You don't like working with me either. That's cool, But nonetheless, like, there has to be a place for all of us, right? Yeah, even the coconuts, guys. Even the sellouts, we got to make room even for them. And it's, it's a tough proposition. And so, it's not easy doing this work, but it is necessary work. And, again, with this whole show, we've really just been kind of picking apart this Trump versus Barbara issue. And really, like, when it all boils down, yeah, this issue, the Supreme Court case, like, it's not us, it's not us directly. And in some ways it could just kind of be, could end up just being completely irrelevant to Guam. But it could also be something that has very deep and damaging implications, and we don't know. We don't know that. And it's so, and I believe that uncertainty is rooted in the ambiguity of our current status, right? And that's just that is the nature of being a territory, is that you're foreign in a domestic sense, but you're domestic in a foreign sense. And you're never one thing or another. You're a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I just think that it's inappropriate. It's not functional. It's outright unfair to live in a reality where your baseline, your fundamental understandings could change by the whim of Congress or the whim of a new president. I mean, this guy could very well be like not the worst. You know what I mean? It's crazy how people like look at Trump and they're just like, man, this got to be like all-time low. Like, we've never had a worser president. Guys, I'm old enough where I said that about George W. I remember watching George W. and being like, damn, I thought Reagan was bad, but this guy, this is just embarrassing. And, I'm one of those that's like, man, what do I care? I don't vote for this president anyway. But, obviously it affects us. And it's crazy, during George W.'s reign of terror, that was the time in my life that I kind of had my awakening, and it's wild because I grew up with parents who were like plugged in, you know what I mean? Parents who were connected to our community and educated and critical. And so, I grew up I remember growing up watching, seeing Nashon Samoru, and like my dad explaining to me why these guys are not the bad guys. I remember my dad telling me you listen to the way that they talk about these Samorus on the news, and him telling me they're gonna make them seem like they're crazy or like they're bad people or that they're breaking the law, but these people are brave because they're standing up for us. They're fighting for us. They're out there for us, for our people. And I remember growing up in that environment, really informed who I became. But I wasn't out there protesting at that time. I wasn't out trying to do community work as a teenager. It was really when I graduated and I went to school and I started to President Bush, George W. was the one that really kind of made me feel it direct, because when he sent soldiers to war in the Middle East, in Iraq and in Afghanistan, those are all my classmates that were getting deployed. And mind you, I went to Southern High School, right? So almost half our class enlisted in the military right after high school. One of my teammates was one of the first set of casualties. Two of my classmates from Southern High School were the group of our first fatalities in that conflict, right? They were Southern High alumni. And so, yeah, that one, it became super personal. And so, that's one of the things that really kind of caught my attention. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot. There's a lot going on. I've been totally just missing comments. Nick Flores is on here saying, presidents lie, people die. Yeah, that's pretty much I should have said it like that. It would have made this faster. Took me 4 minutes to say that. No president is a good president, and you were in gym class. I don't know what that means, but maybe I was. I don't even know if I swear I always skip gym class. Sorry, coach. My bad. I'll get you back. Anyhow, we got a caller on line one. I want to get to our caller before we're up out of time. Hafaday Joe Malik, you're on line one. We only got a few minutes, but how can I get you on here today? Hafaday Joe. Oh, we lost him. Sorry, Joe. No. Sorry, Joe. Maybe I waited too long. Oh, Nate was saying, Nate Flores on our Instagram says, why weren't you at protests? Because I was in gym class. Well, now that we've established that I was skipping gym, there is no good answer for why I wasn't protesting. But at least I wasn't found guilty of truancy, even if I was truant. Oh, man, bad example. I didn't turn out so bad, man. In the end, I was definitely that student that was like, tell me why this is relevant. And what is this going to do for me, man? How is this going to benefit my life? How am I going to rise up out of this oppressive state with this trigonometry? Well, I could have become a certified accountant or an engineer or something, and maybe my life would be a little bit different. Who knows, man? Who knows? I should have been an architect. Oh, why didn't I pay more attention in math class? Instead, I try to be a poet. And look how that turned out, Melvin. Whatever, man. Poetry's cool. Just ask Kaduku. You heard it. Yes. He was bussing. That was poetry. And you was into it. I liked it. Oh man, I'm saying reading, writing, and speaking skills are way, way underrated. They are. I don't care about degrees anymore. I used to think, I was of that generation that was sold that myth that if you get this degree, this is going to separate you from everyone else. And nowadays, like a BA, a bachelor's degree, dude, everybody got a bachelor's degree. You can get that joint online.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like all the bachelor's degree says is that you got student debt.
You were, yeah.
All that says is that you were willing to take out a loan, or you got a scholarship, or your family could handle it, or whatever. You know what I mean? Yeah. You had enough to pay for it. That's really all it says. Man, I have met some dumb people with bachelor's degrees. Real talk.
Oh, God.
Yeah, man. I know a lot of people who have a bachelor's degree, and I otherwise think that they're unintelligent. And I've met a lot of other people who don't have degrees who are super duper smart. And so I used to think that meant something. And now I don't care. Even PhDs, dude. I know some PhD peeps. They got a doctor in front of their name. And I'm like, I don't know how you bought this thing. I don't know how. Who gave you this thing? You're not that smart. But people who can read, people who can write, and people who can speak, like express themselves, verbally and on paper, I mean, those skills are so valuable and so underrated. That's why I always tell my crew at the Commission on Decolonization, I'm like, man, you guys are extremely employable because they all smart. They got their degrees, but they also smart, like real smart. They can read, they can write, they can speak. I mean, my team's awesome. Shout out to my crew. Thank you guys for always being down with me. Anyhow, I want to thank all of our listeners on the Guam COD live on our Instagram. Also, everybody out there in Radio Land on the YouTube Wave YouTube channel. Thanks to everybody who always tunes in every Monday morning. We're happy to continue these community conversations. Shout out to Glimpses Media, Glimpses Guam, and our sponsor, Burger King. I hope all of you are going to have a great day, great week. Hang in there. Looks like it's going to be a nice one. And we'll see you back here next Monday. Same bad time, same bad channel. Have a great day, everyone. Adjust.